Ilyas, a short story by Leo Tolstoy. There once lived, in the government of Ufa, a Bashkir named Ilyas. His father, who died a year after he had found his son a wife, did not leave him much property. Ilyas then had only 7 mares, 2 cows, and about a score of sheep. He was a good manager, however, and soon began to acquire more. He and his wife worked from morn till night, rising earlier than others and going later to bed, and his possessions increased year by year. Living in this way, Ilyas, little by little, acquired great wealth. At the end of 35 years, he had 200 horses, 150 head of cattle, and 1,200 sheep. Hired laborers tended his flocks and herds, and hired women milked his mares and cows, and made kumis, butter, and cheese. Ilyas had abundance of everything, and everyone in the district envied him. They said of him, "Ilyas is a fortunate man. He has plenty of everything. This world must be a pleasant place for him." People of position heard of Ilyas and sought his acquaintance. Visitors came to him from afar, and he welcomed everyone and gave them food and drink. Whoever might come, there was always kumis, tea, sherbet, and mutton to set before them. Whenever visitors arrived, a sheep would be killed, or sometimes 2, and if many guests came, he would even slaughter a mare for them. Ilyas had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, and he married them all off. While he was poor, his sons worked with him and looked after the flocks and herds themselves. But when he grew rich, they got spoiled, and one of them took to drink. The eldest was killed in a brawl, and the younger, who had married a self-willed woman, ceased to obey his father, and they could not live together any more. So they parted, and Ilyas gave his son a house and some of the cattle, and this diminished his wealth. Soon after that, a disease broke out among Ilyas's sheep, and many died. Then followed a bad harvest, and the hay crop failed, and many cattle died that winter. Then the Kirghiz captured his best herd of horses, and Ilyas's property dwindled away. It became smaller and smaller, while at the same time his strength grew less, till, by the time he was 70 years old, he had begun to sell his furs, carpets, saddles, and tents. At last, he had to part with his remaining cattle and found himself face to face with want. Before he knew how it had happened, he had lost everything, and in their old age, he and his wife had to go into service. Ilyas had nothing left except the clothes on his back, a fur cloak, a cup, his indoor shoes and overshoes, and his wife, Shemagi, who also was old by this time. The son who had parted from him had gone into a far country, and his daughter was dead, so that there was no one to help the old couple. Their neighbor, Muhammad Shah, took pity on them. Muhammad Shah was neither rich nor poor, but lived comfortably and was a good man. He remembered Ilyas's hospitality, and pitying him, said, "Come and live with me, Ilyas, you and your old woman. In summer you can work in my melon garden as much as your strength allows, and in winter feed my cattle, and Shemagi shall milk my mares and make kumis. I will feed and clothe you both. When you need anything, tell me, and you shall have it." Ilyas thanked his neighbor, and he and his wife took service with Muhammad Shah as laborers. At first the position seemed hard to them, but they got used to it and lived on, working as much as their strength allowed. Muhammad Shah found it was to his advantage to keep such people, because having been masters themselves, they knew how to manage and were not lazy, but did all the work they could. Yet it grieved Muhammad Shah to see people brought so low who had been of such high standing. It happened once that some of Muhammad Shah's relatives came from a great distance to visit him, and a mullah came too. Muhammad Shah told Ilyas to catch a sheep and kill it. Ilyas skinned the sheep and boiled it, and then sent it in to the guests. The guests ate the mutton, had some tea, and then began drinking kumis. As they were sitting with their host on down cushions on a carpet, conversing and sipping kumis from their cups, Ilyas, having finished his work, passed by the open door. Muhammad Shah, seeing him pass, said to one of the guests, "Did you notice that old man who passed just now?" "Yes," said the visitor. "What is there remarkable about him?" "Only this, that he was once the richest man among us," replied the host. "His name is Ilyas. You may have heard of him." "Of course I have heard of him," the guest answered. "I never saw him before, but his fame has spread far and wide." "Yes, and now he has nothing left," said Muhammad Shah, "and he lives with me as my laborer, and his old woman is here too. She milks the mares." The guest was astonished. He clicked with his tongue, shook his head, and said, "Fortune turns like a wheel. One man it lifts, another it sets down. Does not the old man grieve over all he has lost?" "Who can tell? He lives quietly and peacefully and works well." "May I speak to him?" asked the guest. "I should like to ask him about his life." "Why not?" replied the master, and he called from the kibitka in which they were sitting, "Babai," which in the Bashkir tongue means grandfather. "Come in and have a cup of kumis with us, and call your wife here also." Ilyas entered with his wife, and after exchanging greetings with his master and the guests, he repeated a prayer and seated himself near the door. His wife passed in behind the curtain and sat down with her mistress. A cup of kumis was handed to Ilyas. He wished the guests and his master good health, bowed, drank a little, and put down the cup. "Well, Daddy," said the guest who had wished to speak to him, "I suppose you feel rather sad at the sight of us. It must remind you of your former prosperity and of your present sorrows." Ilyas smiled and said, "If I were to tell you what is happiness and what is misfortune, you would not believe me. You had better ask my wife. She is a woman, and what is in her heart is on her tongue. She will tell you the whole truth." The guest turned towards the curtain. "Well, Granny," he cried, "tell me how your former happiness compares with your present misfortune." And Shamshamagi answered from behind the curtain, "This is what I think about it. My old man and I lived for 50 years, seeking happiness and not finding it. And it is only now, these last 2 years, since we had nothing left and have lived as laborers, that we have found real happiness, and we wish for nothing better than our present lot." The guests were astonished, and so was the master. He even rose and drew the curtain back so as to see the old woman's face. There she stood with her arms folded, looking at her old husband, and smiling, and he smiled back at her. The old woman went on, "I speak the truth, and do not jest. For half a century we sought for happiness, and as long as we were rich, we never found it. Now that we have nothing left and have taken service as laborers, we have found such happiness that we want nothing better." "But in what does your happiness consist?" asked the guest. "Why, in this," she replied. "When we were rich, my husband and I had so many cares that we had no time to talk to one another, or to think of our souls, or to pray to God. Now we had visitors, and had to consider what food to set before them, and what presents to give them, lest they should speak ill of us. When they left, we had to look after our laborers, who were always trying to shirk work and get the best food, while we wanted to get all we could out of them. So we sinned. Then we were in fear lest a wolf should kill a foal or a calf, or thieves steal our horses. We lay awake at night, worrying lest the ewes should overlie their lambs, and we got up again and again to see that all was well. One thing attended to, another care would spring up. How, for instance, to get enough fodder for the winter. And besides that, my old man and I used to disagree. He would say we must do so, and I would differ from him, and then we disputed, sinning again. So we passed from one trouble to another, from one sin to another, and found no happiness." "Well, and now?" "Now, when my husband and I wake in the morning, we always have a loving word for one another, and we live peacefully, having nothing to quarrel about. We have no care but how best to serve our master. We work as much as our strength allows, and do it with a will that our master may not lose, but profit by us. When we come in, dinner or supper is ready, and there is kumis to drink. We have fuel to burn when it is cold, and we have our fur cloak. And we have time to talk, time to think of our souls, and time to pray. For 50 years we sought happiness, but only now at last have we found it. The guests laughed, but Ilyas said, "Do not laugh, friends. It is not a matter for jesting. It is the truth of life. We also were foolish at first, and wept at the loss of our wealth. But now God has shown us the truth, and we tell it, not for our own consolation, but for your good." And the mullah said, "That is a wise speech. Ilyas has spoken the exact truth. The same is said in Holy Writ." And the guests ceased laughing and became thoughtful. Evil allures, but good endures. A spiritual parable from Leo Tolstoy. There lived in olden times a good and kindly man. He had this world's goods in abundance, and many slaves to serve him. And the slaves prided themselves on their master, saying, "There is no better lord than ours under the sun. He feeds and clothes us well, and gives us work suited to our strength. He bears no malice, and never speaks a harsh word to anyone. He is not like other masters, who treat their slaves worse than cattle, punishing them whether they deserve it or not, and never giving them a friendly word. He wishes us well, does good, and speaks kindly to us. We do not wish for a better life." Thus the slaves praised their lord, and the devil, seeing it, was vexed that slaves should live in such love and harmony with their master. So getting one of them, whose name was Allures, into his power, the devil ordered him to tempt the other slaves. And one day, when they were all sitting together, resting and talking of their master's goodness, Allures raised his voice and said, "It is stupid to make so much of our master's goodness. The devil himself would be kind to you if you did what he wanted. We serve our master well and humor him in all things. As soon as he thinks of anything, we do it, foreseeing all his wishes. What can he do but be kind to us? Just try how it will be if, instead of humoring him, we do him some harm instead. He will act like anyone else and will repay evil for evil, as the worst of masters do." The other slaves began denying what Allures had said, and at last bet with him. Allures undertook to make their master angry. If he failed, he was to lose his holiday garment, but if he succeeded, the other slaves were to give him theirs. Moreover, they promised to defend him against the master, and to set him free if he should be put in chains or imprisoned. Having arranged this bet, Allures agreed to make his master angry next morning. Allures was a shepherd, and had in his charge a number of valuable pure-bred sheep, of which his master was very fond. Next morning, when the master brought some visitors into the enclosure to show them the valuable sheep, Allures winked at his companions, as if to say, "See now how angry I will make him." All the other slaves assembled, looking in at the gates or over the fence, and the devil climbed a tree nearby to see how his servant would do his work. The master walked about the enclosure, showing his guests the ewes and lambs, and presently he wished to show them his finest ram. "All the rams are valuable," said he, "but I have one with closely twisted horns, which is priceless. I prize him as the apple of my eye." Startled by the strangers, the sheep rushed about the enclosure so that the visitors could not get a good look at the ram. As soon as it stood still, Allures startled the sheep as if by accident, and they all got mixed up again. The visitors could not make out which was the priceless ram. At last, the master got tired of it. "Allures, dear friend," he said, "pray catch our best ram for me, the one with the tightly twisted horns. Catch him very carefully, and hold him still for a moment." Scarcely had the master said this, when Allures rushed in among the sheep like a lion and clutched the priceless ram. Holding him fast by the wool, he seized the left hind leg with one hand, and before his master's eyes, lifted it and jerked it so that it snapped like a dry branch. He had broken the ram's leg, and it fell bleating onto its knees. Then Aleb seized the right hind leg, while the left twisted round and hung quite limp. The visitors and the slaves exclaimed in dismay, and the devil, sitting up in the tree, rejoiced that Aleb had done his task so cleverly. The master looked as black as thunder, frowned, bent his head, and did not say a word. The visitors and the slaves were silent too, waiting to see what would follow. After remaining silent for a while, the master shook himself as if to throw off some burden. Then he lifted his head and, raising his eyes heavenward, remained so for a short time. Presently the wrinkles passed from his face, and he looked down at Aleb with a smile, saying, "Oh, Aleb, Aleb, your master bade you anger me, but my master is stronger than yours. I am not angry with you, but I will make your master angry. You are afraid that I shall punish you, and you have been wishing for your freedom. Know then, Aleb, that I shall not punish you, but, as you wish to be free here before my guests, I set you free. Go where you like, and take your holiday garment with you." And the kind master returned with his guests to the house. But the devil, grinding his teeth, fell down from the tree and sank through the ground.